Hello there. In this video I'm going to talk about how you can create your own pattern file that is a blender file rather than a 3D printable file. Create your own pattern file so that you can create a wide range of personalised earrings. So in other words, there's lots of files on your system which you've probably seen and a lot of which you might have opened. We're going to show you how you can actually create one of them with your own pattern from the point of view of creating earrings. So if you start Fluid Designer up, so what I'm talking about are these kind of objects here. When you drag and drop those onto the workspace, so I'll do the Celtic knot one for example, you can set the columns and you can set the rows and create different patterns out of one single pattern. So I'm going to show you how you can create this particular type of file. So if I just go to File and New, first of all we'll move that window out of the way, and if I just open up the outliner window here, you can see it's empty more or less at the moment apart from this Fluid Designer for 3D printing file, object, which doesn't in fact do anything. If I go to File and Append, and if I just go up through the menu system to the Groups folder, we're doing earrings here. So if I go to earrings, now a few seconds ago I opened up the Celtic knot earring 3-leaf, and if I select that one and go to Object, if I now press A on the keyboard to highlight all of those objects, and if I hold down the Shift key and just click on and deselect Celtic knot earring 3-leaf, I don't want that particular object. I just want all of the other objects that are available in each of these earring files, including the angular rotation object. So if I just append those from the library, you'll see that they are all imported into my current workspace. Now the files that are here, cross-section, they're all currently hidden, and you can keep them as hidden. You don't need to switch them on like this, you don't need to change them. We're just going to use those objects for adding a cross-section to our pattern that we're going to create. The angular rotation file, if I open up the properties panel and if I just zoom in, this object is something called an empty. It's a plane axis empty, and all this object is used for is to create a circular path for our pattern that we're going to create. And as you can see at the moment, there's one value over here for angular rotation, and that is 60 degrees. Now if you actually add your own empty, the name of it will just say empty. So you need to click in this box and rename it as angular rotation if that's what you're going to use. Now the value here of 60 degrees, because in a circle there is 360 degrees, it's important that this value here is increments, even increments of 360. So examples are 180 degrees could be used, 90 degrees could be used, 72 degrees could be used, because 5 times 72 is also 360. 60 degrees can be used because 6 times 60 degrees is 360. You can also use 45 and 30 degrees as well. Other angles entered here will give an uneven appearance to your array, your circular array. You can do that if you want, but generally speaking you would use the values that I've just mentioned as the angle here. So let me just go to view on the top. So that object is just going to be used when we create a circular array. So now what I want to do is I want to add my own pattern here. And first of all I'm going to open up the toolbox here, and I'll just switch on screencast keys. And I'm going to actually use the curves galore command, because you can add many different types of curve here quite easily. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a flower object, and so there's the default one, and it's got 8 petals. Well, I'm going to reduce that down to just 4 petals. And most of the time when I'm working with Fluid Designer for 3D printing, I use NURBS objects that are 3-dimensional, and so I'm going to change that to NURBS 3D, and then I'm going to wrap one of these cross sections around that curve, because that's what this is now. When we change it to NURBS 3D, it's actually a curve object, and we can see that in the properties panel because this curve icon appears, and we can also see that over here in the outliner window because it says the name flower. And if I click on the main information icon, I can change this name here, and I can call it my flower, for example. And that's quite important, because if you go to file, if after we've saved this, if you go to file and append from library, when you go and search in there, like for this Celtic knot, for example, now we haven't used this particular object, we used all the others. This name here comes from the name here in the properties panel. So it's really quite important to name this properly so that you can use it in future and you can find it more easily. Makes more sense. If you just leave the default name there, it doesn't necessarily make any sense. So I could change this to my flower, and I could call it 4-leaf flower to be more accurate, and you can see the name appear at the bottom of the screen. So that gives it more detail, more precise. Now at the moment, if we look at this, this is pretty small. This is only 1.5 millimeters, and if we look at our grid, our default grid, that's 21 millimeters. 1.5 millimeters is too small, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to click with the left mouse button and drag here and increase that outer radius, and yeah, that's not a bad value. About 8.5 millimeters is a good size to sort of work to. You could have it a bit smaller, but that's okay. So if I just go to view and view that from the top, so I've created my curve here. I could make further changes to it. I could actually go into sort of edit mode and modify it by moving one of the control points, but that's not necessary for what I'm about to do here. So I've created my pattern, so I don't need my toolbox anymore, so I can press the T key on the keyboard to delete that, to remove it, or just drag it back. So now what I want to do is to add a bevel object. I want to add some thickness to this, and so I'm going to add a cross-sectional diameter of 1 millimeter, and you can see there that that's looking okay. So you know, in real terms, the size of that object is only something like that. But a bevel object of 1 millimeter looks okay wrapped around that flower curve with the 4 leaves. My name's disappeared over here, so I'm going to put that back in. So it's my flower with 4 leaf. That probably disappeared when we added on the thickness. I think it should stay there. Well, actually what we should do is probably save this, because sometimes when working with these objects, naming can disappear until you save it. So quite unusual if we're working with Fluid Designer. We're actually going to go to File and Save now. We're not going to export this, we're going to save it as a Blender file. So I need to save it in the earrings folder, and the default name is untitled, but I'm going to call it Flower 4 Leaf 001 MASTER in capitals. Now I just use the word master there to indicate that this is a Blender file, that it's a kind of template file, and once it's been created we shouldn't really be saving on top of it again. We should just be using it to create 3D printable objects. So I'm going to save this as a Blender file, and that should stay there now, that name. So we've got some cross-sectional objects here which we've imported into this. We've got an angular rotation object there. I can actually minimize that panel a little bit so I can see my browser window there. And what I need to do now is to add some modifiers so that whoever opens up this file in the future will be able to simply create new objects. And the modifiers I'm going to add an array modifier. And you can see what's happening there. It creates additional copies of my pattern to the right. Basically, it's creating 1, 2, 3, in this case, 4 columns. Now, rather than keep this name here as array, if I click in that box, if I say set the columns, when this is closed up and somebody drags and drops this, they'll be able to see what this array is doing. Rather than just have the general name array, setting the columns makes a bit more sense. And what we also need to do is to adjust this relative offset, because at 1 it won't be 3D printable. You'll have 4 separate objects. We need some overlap there. Now if we want so that will give us an array going along the x-axis. What we could also do is to add another modifier, and I don't want further objects to the right. I can generate those from changing the count up here. What I want is rows of objects to the top here. And so what I need to do is I need to change this value here for the x direction to 0, and I want to change the y value here. You can see that the green arrow is pointing upwards, and so if the offset is in the y direction, I'll get an additional row. So rather than have this labeled as array, if I click in there, if I change it to set the rows, then by changing the count I can add in additional rows of my pattern. Now the only thing that I want to do now is to add a circular array, and we can do that using this angular rotation object over here, and by ticking in the object offset here and changing this to angular rotation. And as you can see, when I do that, I get 1, 2, 3, 4 objects rotated, and if I go to 5 and 6, that should be the total number that I can do here now, because the angular rotation is 60 degrees. 6 copies times 60 degrees is 360 degrees. If I actually add in a further value to the count, all I'll be doing is placing objects on top of existing objects. So if I go to a count of 9, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The 7th will go here, the 8th here, and the 9th here. That will cause you serious problems if you try and 3D print this object, because you'll have objects literally on top of each other. You don't want that. So you don't want to exceed 6. So be careful with your count. Make sure you don't add an additional object on top of the original one. So that's how you can create an angular rotation. So yeah, that's how you can actually create your own pattern, in this case a 4-leaf flower pattern, and how you can set up the columns and set up the row arrays, how you can add cross sections by just using append. And the only thing to really do now is that if you take note of what all the objects look like in the browser panel here, they all look pretty much the same sort of size, and the way to actually do that is, if you've got your object on the workspace like that, if you just press the home key on the keyboard, it will size it up, and that can be treated as your default size, like this 10mm circular earring over here. Fluid Designer will create a screenshot image of this without the properties window there, so you don't need to worry about the properties window. You can leave that open. That won't be displayed in the browser, but this image will. Now if you save it, if you save your document like that, that's what will appear in the browser, and that will be a little bit too small. So if you press the home key, it will maximize the size of your object, and I could just switch that count down a little bit and leave that as my default appearance, and just press home again, and all I need to do is to go to File and Save. Now remember, I've saved this before as Flower Leaf 1, so that's okay. So I'm just right on top of that with the modifiers that I've applied and the settings that I've applied to this now. So if we just go to File and New and restart the system, if we just scroll down, we should be looking for flower. We should be able to see the one that the object that we've just created, so it should come under the F's. So we're getting down to F's now. So that's FD. So here it is. This is the item that we've just created. You can see the icon is a reasonable size to view the what's in it, and if you just drag and drop that onto the workspace, you can then change the pattern. So you could set the rows at say 3, so that could be the earring that you want to create. And then, like you do with most of the other files in Fluid Designer for 3D printing, rather than go to File and Save, you go to File and export it as a wavefront object. Okay, so yeah, that's the end of this lesson, this video, showing you how you can create your own pattern and save it in the earrings folder. Thank you.